Good morning and welcome to Coffee and the Word. Monday morning encouragement today, and we're going to take our encouragement from 2 Corinthians chapter 10, which I think is a powerful text to remind you of what you're capable of. And so 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 4, and I thought I should have probably opened this before I got on with you, but anyway. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, here's what Paul writes. He says in verse 1, "By the humility and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you. I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but bold towards you when away. I beg you that when I come, I may not have to be as bold as I expect to be towards some people who think they live by the standard of this world." And then I want you to listen to this part, because he says, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does." And this is what I think is important. This is your encouragement this morning, is the recognition that we aren't stuck using the same poor, depleted methods of attacking or of defending this in this world that others are. You know, the same methods that tend to create havoc and the same methods that create chaos are not the methods by which we are called to operate. In fact, what he says, though we live in the world, we don't wage war as the world does. Listen to this. The weapons we fight with are not weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And so I think it's important for us to understand a concept that I think a lot of us struggle with, and that is, you are not beholden to your thought patterns. In other words, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday in my sermon, but I think our biggest enemy is oftentimes ourselves. Like, we tend to fight ourselves, and it's those things that come up in our minds, and it's those things that it's the naysayer in our own heart that tells us what we can and can't do, right? It's some of us have a tendency to allow our minds to dictate our actions, and I think there is a little bit here that tells us that we can take captive our thoughts, and the reason we would have to take them captive is because they've gone rogue. They've made up their own plans. They've done their own things. They're going their own direction. They're causing us to think in ways that are outside of what God has called us to do. And so Paul says, we have a different weaponry. We have a different capability to fight a different kind of battle. And he says, and the thing that you need to do is tear down the strongholds. And one of the greatest strongholds is your mind. You probably lie to yourself more than anybody else. You probably are deceived and discouraged more by your own mind than you are by anything else. In fact, I would dare suggest that many of the actions in which you take are a result of your stinking thinking, which we've done a whole series on, but your actions are often, your negative actions are often a result of you giving in to the foolishness of your own thoughts. And so Paul says here, he's like, you don't have to be a prisoner of that. You have weaponry at your disposal to overcome. And you're like, well, what is that weaponry? And I think that's the question we ought to ask. And so Ephesians chapter 6 gives us a little bit of an insight into what your weaponry is. And it's maybe not what you think it is. And of course, I know many of you have studied this, but the first thing he says, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in the heavenly places. And then he says, so don the armor so that you'll be able to stand. And the armor is faith and salvation and truth and peace and the gospel and the sword of the Spirit is the Word of God. And then he says, pray in the Spirit. And so here's my encouragement to you this morning. And I know some of you have, it's Monday morning, you're rushing, you woke up late, you're disappointed the Cowboys lost yesterday, you got the Monday morning blues. And so I want you to stop for just a second and don your armor. Remember who you are. You are a child of the Most High God. You have been set free from the law of sin and death. You have been rescued from all the guilt and all of the failures of your life. You have a reason to rejoice this morning. And don't take another step before you offer up a prayer and give God thanks for the day He's given you and the opportunities that are before you. I hope this encourages you. Take captive your minds and make them obedient. Take captive your mind, all of them, and make it obedient to Christ. Hope you have a great Monday morning. This has been another edition of Coffee and the Word.